why monarchy is important for Great Britain?
For stability, continuity and stability. You've seen a lot of that in the last few weeks. You see how the transition can happen very smoothly. You wouldn't necessarily invent the system, but it works extremely well. It means, of course, that the monarch holds a lot of power, which means that other people don't. They can't use it. He won't use it. They can't use it because it's invested in him. It's a very good system. And also it's a very good idea to have a head of state who is above politics and who's not climbed the greasy pole of politics, scrambling their way to the top. And also in the case, for example, particularly of the late Queen, she had a very, very strong religious faith, so she saw herself definitely not as the top person. There was always God, you know, so that was also good, I think. So we have a nice picture of the Queen around about the time of the coronation, wearing the diadem. And then you have her as a little girl with her grandmother and King George and Queen Elizabeth. These are some peers and peeresses just modelling the different robes that were going to be used. Then you have people arriving for the rehearsals. It's always rather fun. They go on a lot, of course. Archbishop of Canterbury, the Dean of Westminster, Princess Margaret arriving, the Duke of Norfolk, who is the Earl Marshal. This is the anointing, which is the most important part of the whole ceremony, which is why the Queen would never abdicate. Foreign monarchs, like Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands, King Juan Carlos of Spain, King Albert of the Belgians, were not anointed, and they all abdicated. Moment of crowning, which follows. And we have some more pictures here. Winston Churchill, for example, leaving in the robes of the Order of the Garter, the Queen with the crown on. And we end up with a nice balcony scene at the end of the whole proceedings.
Dugo nisam bila kod Hugo Vikersa. Bila sam ranije u onom stanu ispod. Međutim, veliki su radovi o rekonstrukciji čitave kuće jer došli su novi stanari. I ono što ovdje zatičem, to je na neki način dosta uznemirenog Huga Vikersa, kome je potpuno mir poremećen. Pitam ga sve ono zbog čega sam došla ovdje kod njega. Sedim preko puta njega i da mi ispriča šta se sve dogodilo u međuvremenu otkad smo se posljednji put vidjeli. I just explained the new situation.
Okay.
Now, we are upstairs before we have been downstairs. What's going on, Hugo?
Well, we got a lot of building works going on in the building in the flat below, which makes a lot of noise, drilling, and they always do it when you try and film. Otherwise, it's a very peaceful place in a nice little square in London. The traffic is 2 blocks away, you hear nothing normally. But today, of course, there's a drill like going into your head.
But it's interesting, when I offered you that I go down and I talk to the workers, you didn't allow me, and you said what? That
well, because the trouble is, if you try and stop them from working, then they're going to either charge me a fortune for a waste of time, or I've got also to discuss with some problems we have with the building with them later on, and it put me in a very difficult situation, I think, negotiating with them.
But definitely I didn't want to refrain from this interview. I took it under any circumstances. Last time when we talked, we have been talking about the personality of Queen. And now what I want to ask you, do you think that you can get into the personality of her son, the king? Have you been thinking about?
Well, yes, well, of course, we've been through the most extraordinary phase here in England with the death of the Queen, which I suppose was to some extent expected, and yet somehow she was so resilient. I mean, I saw her in June and I thought she was in very good form, and I thought really could live to be 100. And then, of course, we saw her at Balmoral, and the usual newspaper articles came out the next day showing her room and the pictures and what she had in the room, like they do. And then the following day, she suddenly left us. Well, the new king, he has a very hard act to follow. with his mother, obviously, because she was, as you know, universally respected, probably the most respected head of state in the world, as is indicated by all the people who came, all the heads of state who came from every corner of the globe to attend her funeral. And but the following night he made a really good speech addressed to the nation, and he actually, for the first time, he really spoke like a king, and also he spoke for us rather than for himself. In the past, he's been slightly inclined when the Queen Mother died. He sort of said, what am I going to do? I've lost my great ally in life. You know, I loved my grandmother. Where he could have possibly said, she was 101 years old. She served the nation very well and did a fantastic job. This time, he got it absolutely right. And it was, I think he's been universally praised for that. He is, of course, a different character. And because we know so much about what he thinks, because he was Prince of Wales for such a long time, he is more, a little bit more controversial perhaps than the Queen. The Queen was very young when she came to the throne. We knew nothing about her, and she never said a thing in public controversial the whole of her long reign. And he has, of course, said things. So it's more difficult for him. It's a very difficult position to take up at the age of 73.
Do you think that he has to correct certain things about his nature and the way how he deals with people? Do you think, because he's now a king, right?
He made it very clear that he completely understood that in that first address. As Prince of Wales, I think he was absolutely right to go round and tell people what he thought. If he was a colonel of a regiment and he saw the troops going into battle with inadequate equipment, of course he must say so. They don't have to listen to him, and one of his complaints always was that they didn't listen to him enough. But of course he should say it. Now, as king, he can say it privately, but he must obviously, every public statement that he makes is vetted by the government. You know, when he makes a speech, when he opens Parliament, if he makes a big speech abroad at a state visit or something like that, it will all be approved by the Foreign Office or the Prime Minister. So, but he understands that. He's been around for a very long time. So what I see is, in a sense, that this is a kind of transitional role for him. He steps back from his active role as Prince of Wales. He becomes this rather more dignified, quiet figure at the centre of everything. And if he's very generous, he will do what the Queen did, and he will tie up some loose ends and make things easier for Prince William when he, in the fullness of time, takes over. Because in the last few months of the Queen's reign, she tidied up all the, well, not quite all of them, but as many loose ends as possible. For example, she told us that she wanted Camilla to be called Queen. Well, after 70 years on the throne, we jolly well accept that. It's a small favour she asked us, and it worked very well. If he'd asked us for that, it would have been controversial, I think. Likewise, she made Tony Blair Knight of the Garter, so that Prince Charles didn't have to do that when he was king. You know, again, if she does it, we accept it.
You supported enormously the Queen, enormously. You never went public, and you always minimized all your communications with her. But you have been there for her jubilees, and you advised her and this and that.
No, I never advised her about anything, but I certainly was involved with the jubilees, and I've obviously followed her very closely all through my adult life. And since I was a child, the first time I saw the Queen was in 1959, when she was on welcoming the Shah of Persia on a state visit. And I enjoyed it so much I asked to be taken out of school the following year to see General de Gaulle when he came on his state visit. I was very young at the time, 7 or 8 years old.
Are you going to be included with all the activities of the king? Have you been thinking about to give maybe? You're always avoiding when I say advising. You are typical English discreet, really.
No, but it's true.
You have a knowledge which is unknown in this country. Such a history of closeness and following the royal family of this country, with not only with the knowledge and the background, but with a certain unseen dedication, if I may say. So
Well, I'm certainly very interested in the coronation because I wrote a book about the coronation, and I will hopefully be able to explain to anyone who wants to ask what the ritual is and what needs to happen and why it happens and so forth, because people don't understand that. And I hope that they will make it a good coronation, because not only is it a very sacred rite, but also, of course, it is a television event. And when you think of all the people who queued to see the lying in state, you know that about 90% of those people will have had no idea what they were going to see. They would never have known what a gentleman at arms was, let alone a grenadier guard. And when they came into Westminster Hall, they would see these traditions that had gone back through centuries. And at the Queen's funeral, when they took the crown off the coffin and the orb off the coffin, and when the Lord Chamberlain broke his wand. Now, you may think that's all ridiculous. It isn't ridiculous at all. It's steeped in history. The barge master took, I think, the orb. And why did he do that? It's because the crown jewels used to be taken from the Tower of London by boat up to Westminster for the state opening of Parliament. So the barge master has a role. All these things are very interesting, and I think people enjoy it. I mean, I certainly did as a child, and that's when it got into my head. And so I think a lot of people who saw the lying in state will hope that they will make a magnificent coronation with all the uniforms and robes and the crown jewels and everything coming out. If they turn it into what you might call a lounge suit coronation, it'll be a disaster.
how do you see the new situation now in Britain, where everybody is saying that there is no money, the crisis is coming, everything is coming at once? How do you see it? Because you have a very long memory, right?
Yes. Well,
How
I
do you
think,
see it?
I mean, not only in Britain, but all over the world, everything is in a mess. It's very difficult. We have had a particularly difficult time over here because we have had two things. Not only did we have the long lockdown period because of the COVID pandemic, which obviously affected everybody, and measures were put in place to help people, which have to be paid for. But of course, in this country, we have the other thing, which is so awful, which is Brexit, which has caused the most enormous problems to everybody. Even not too bad to me, but when I went to Paris, you know, I had to think a little bit harder than before. It was all right, but it was still a nuisance. You have to show your passport, you have to have it stamped now. We're aliens. And of course, a lot of things like trade with, with Europe is really difficult. Now, the one good thing that I think has happened, we have a new Prime Minister, and we have now got a Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who is well educated. He is married to an extremely rich woman, which I actually think doesn't isolate him. It just puts him in a position where he will never take a bribe or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? He will be above all that because that's sorted out. So and also people who marry very, very rich wives, they very often spend their time lying around on yachts. They don't dedicate themselves to public service. And he is extremely dedicated to public service. And he, I'm told, if there's a meeting, he wants to corral a decision at the end of the meeting. He's not going to let it drift. And yesterday, as we speak, in the House of Commons, he was so assured. And suddenly I thought, I think we're now in the right hands. He's also, trained in economics. He devised the furlough scheme, which was immensely successful over here, helped a lot of people. Not everybody, but it helped a lot of people. And so I think that gives us great confidence. So that's the first glimmer of light in an otherwise pretty bleak world.
When you hear that Britain has problems, and that Britain, what they say, is not anymore what it was, can you believe it all? Can you believe it all?
No, I think we saw what Britain can be at the time of the Queen's funeral. I mean, you saw the way people came out into the streets, hundreds of thousands of people, all of them devoted, loyal citizens. The best of the British were seen on this occasion, and of course we do those things extremely well. Also, the transition was very easy from one monarch to another, because that's been established over a long period of time, and we have a constitutional monarchy. Therefore, you know, the powers of the monarch have been curbed over the years, which makes it acceptable. No, that I think the British are still, they're pretty good behind the scenes. But, you know, they, of course, people have had a difficult time. I do actually think that, I mean, I've been saying to people that I cannot think of a reign in history in which I would have preferred to live under any political or economic circumstances than the reign of the Queen. We have actually had it very, very easy compared to other reigns. Even if you lived in Tudor times, if you were a, let's say, very rich person in Tudor times, you could make one political mistake, you have your head chopped off. My father's generation had to go to war. My father, for 5 years, he was either serving or he was wounded and he was in hospital at the time when he should have been having a lovely time in his late 20s. My mother was driving ambulances throughout the war and driving a general around when she should have been, young girl at that time, would have been going to parties, meeting people, having a nice job. We didn't have to do anything like that. The only thing that we've had in recent times is the lockdown, when we were told, please stay in the comfort of your own home. That's not so bad. Now, I know for some people, of course, living in a very small place, and that could have been very difficult, but it's not the same as going out and having to fight a war. We haven't had to do that. There's a lot of things that have been much better.
Put yourself in a situation where you have to advise. What will advise the king, for example? Because you have such an experience. His emotions are quite different. Emotionally, he's different than his mother, completely.
He is, yes.
He's more open. He shows his he shows his emotions to people.
Well, that's true.
Do you think it's good now?
Well, I think, for example, in that first address which he gave, which was so good, there was a bit of an emotional moment, but I think we all respected that. I mean, he had just lost his mother the day before. I mean, I think that's fine. Personally, I like the way that the Queen and Prince Philip did things, because the great thing about them was that they didn't care a jot what you thought about them. They just got on with the job, which is what we all ought to do. And he does mind much more. He minds what people think about him. He thinks people don't like him. He's sensitive, but if you're sensitive to the outside world, inevitably you're sensitive towards yourself. And so the balance is tricky, I think. That sensitivity towards other people is good, sensitivity towards yourself is bad, but you can't have the one without the other. But I think that, you know, he's had plenty of time to think about what sort of a king he's going to be. And, you know, I just, as I say, the main thing I would, if I was advising him, would be, you know, for him to think about how he could leave the monarchy in a better situation than he found it. You know, that when he came there, to make it easier for the next family, the next generation which comes along. I don't know if he'll do that or not. We'll see.
Do you expect that soon or not?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he is now 73 years old. He's obviously not going to be there for as long as his mother. We don't know how long he's going to be there. But to my mind, I think, this is the way I think, is that, you know, if you're given something in life, you want to preserve it and you want to hand it on in a better situation if you possibly can to the next generation. I'm sure that's part of what he's thinking, but I don't think he will ask me to advise him at all. And this reign is not really my reign so much. I think that a lot of things kind of died a little bit on the 8th of September, to be quite honest.
The coronation is a turning point in a way. The coronation is in fact the end of an era.
Well, the new
and
era.
the start of an era.
The new era has already begun. The coronation is a way of confirming that, and it's a way, I think you'll find, I've studied the coronations of several kings and queens very closely. I've read the Archbishop of Canterbury's papers, I've read all the documentation about the coronations of George VI and so forth. I bought a whole mass of papers about it, so I've read all the little dramas and all the little decisions that had to be made. One thing which is absolutely clear is that the sovereign comes into Westminster Abbey as one person and goes out of Westminster Abbey as a different person. And it's all to do with being anointed and the affirmation and then being crowned. And that ceremony has a very, very profound effect on them.
What exactly this is for the nation here? The coronation means what?
Well, on BBC, a particular commentator said, why are they putting on a coronation when people are homeless and people are suffering? I, on the other hand, on ITN, said I thought it would be the biggest boost for the country you could possibly have. I can tell you that already the hotels have tripled their prices. You can hardly get an airfare into London from the United States. People will flock from all corners of the world to see what I hope will be a magnificent display. The Gold State Coach will come out. All the crown jewels will come from the Tower of London. You know, television is now so sophisticated that you can film it in a way that the last coronation frankly wasn't filmed. I mean, the camera angles were, I mean, you'd be horrified by the camera angles. They literally had one in the organ loft, so when you saw people coming in, fine, but when they went out, you just saw the back of them, or the other way around. They didn't have cameras at either end. I mean, it's completely different. So you can now make something which will impress the whole world. And as did the state funeral of the Queen and the committal service and all those processions. And they had the lying in state, as you know, probably on a loop continually. You could turn on the one particular channel and see it any time of the day or night. It was a wonderful decision because people all over the world, they have different hours, as you know. So if somebody in Australia wants to wake up and look what's happening in Westminster Hall, they can do so. They could do so. It was fantastic.
Mr. Vikers, where are you going to be that day?
Well, I'll probably be in an ITN studio wishing that I could say more than they're going to let me say.
And you're going to, and probably you're going to be the one who is giving more details than any other television.
If they let me, yes.
They are going to.
Well, they don't always. They don't, actually.
They always do.
No. Well, the trouble is that in the olden days, you would have a commentator like Richard Dimbleby for the BBC. He would do the whole commentary from beginning to end. So therefore, he would have trained himself about every single detail. And whatever came up onto the screen, he could talk about. They don't do that anymore. I mean, even yesterday, 2 days ago, Hugh Edwards from the BBC talked about Rishi Sunak arriving at Buckingham Palace being greeted by 2 royal household officials. Well, we've seen Sir Edward Young and Sir Clive Alderton plenty of times on the television recently. He should have known who they were, the private secretary to the Queen and the private secretary to the King.
Okay, may I make a tiny conclusion? That the amount of knowledge is less and less.
True.
True?
Yes.
And how it is possible to maintain this kind of an expertise, to be always, you know, there and to make the right comment.
I know a lot about the coronation. I can talk about the coronation. When there isn't a coronation, I've got plenty of other things to get on with quietly at home, and I don't need to be in front of the camera. But for those moments, I hope I can make a contribution.
Thank you so much for having me in your apartment and sharing with you all your pain about the noise.
Which now stops, of course.
Yes, and disturbances. And I would like to see your book on coronation now.
These chairs are coronation chairs from Westminster Abbey, from the time of George VI, so 1937. You've been sitting on one of them for the interview. You will appreciate that they are very comfortable. They're designed for people to sit for many hours in very uncomfortable clothes in Westminster Abbey, and then afterwards people were allowed to buy them. I've picked them up over the years. I have 17 of them altogether, and I use them sometimes as dining room chairs because they're very comfortable.
Hugo, does it mean that you are making your own collection?
Yes.
What? Everything is finished and then you pick up the chair? What?
Well, if you'd gone to the service, the coronation, then they gave you the right to buy the chairs. Obviously, over the years, people die and they go on the market. And sometimes they're very, if you look at them on eBay, they're extremely expensive, but I've never paid very much for them. I've paid something between 30 and 75 pounds each, but this is a long time ago.
Yeah, because you are working for them.
Well, the thing is that people very often have them in their houses. They have a couple because they both went to the coronation. When they die, nobody wants them. I think these ones belong to Duff Cooper, who was a well-known politician. And when Lady Diana Cooper died, I asked the son if I could buy the chairs, and he said yes, so I bought them. So they're very nice, and the same for the Queen. I don't know if they'll make special chairs this time. They should, but they may not. We'll see.
Idemo sad u garažu da vidimo gde stoje knjige. Hugo me vodi sada u garažu gde je knjiga o krunisanju i hoće da mi je pokaže.
I just see if I can
Volela
find
bi da imam
one.
tu knjigu.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
See you soon for
Yes.
the coronation.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Keep one chair for me.
Yeah.